If you're asking yourself, am I qualified to be a community leader? If you're wrestling with this and a little bit scared that you might not be qualified, then great. That's a good place to be. If you're sat there thinking, of course I'm qualified, you probably don't know what you're getting yourself in for. What are the qualifications of a community leader? Well, I think the first one is obvious. You need to love God. The second is you need to love people. And the third is you need to be willing. We can talk about character and things like that, but that's for another time. And I want to focus on the being willing. And I want to share some of my history and my story, because I'm not sat here as a guru, as an expert, kind of saying, this is how you lead a community because I'm such a genius. In fact, at one point, I would probably say I was the worst community leader ever in Josh Gen. So let me tell you a little bit about my story. In the very early days of Josh Gen, Andrew asked to do supper, and I knew he had something to speak into my life about. So we did supper, and probably at about 10 o'clock at night, just as he's walking out the door, he said, "Oh yes, by the way, you know how it happens." And he said, "I want to ask you something." He said, "How would you feel about leading a community?" And my answer was literally this: I would rather be slowly stung to death by killer bees. I had zero desire to lead a community. I'd preached a couple of times in Josh Gen when he'd been away. I'd organised a foundations course. I'd done a couple of things. And Andrew looked at me, he said, "Mike," he said, "I've heard you teach, and you've got a teaching gift. But you will never be the teacher God's called you to be unless you learn to love people better." You know that old cliche, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. He said, "I really think that leading a community will be good for you to develop within you the ability to practically love people." And of course, I had the opportunity to say no, but I didn't. I said, "I'll do you a deal. I'll say yes if you agree to clean up the mess that I make, because it's going to be a mess." And he agreed. And you know, there's a key to leadership there. And as communities, I want you to hear this. Andrew took a risk on me. He asked me to lead a community, not because I was a great shepherd, but because I needed to become better. And he was willing to risk because he saw some potential in me and the weakness, and he was prepared to work on the weakness. And so I started leading a community, and it was incredibly successful. I grew to 8 people. And at one point, 3 of those were under some form of discipline at the same time. And of those 8, if I look back, the number of them still in Josh Gen is me and my wife. So hardly the most successful guy, hardly the greatest community leader in the history of mankind. After a couple of years, for a season, we closed down communities. That's a story for another time. And so I wasn't leading a community at all. And then in a leaders meeting, Andrew said, "Hey, we've got a couple. They're leading one of our communities. They're going through some marriage difficulties. We need somebody to come alongside them and lead that community with them and for them for a while. Is there anybody who will do it?" And I stuck my hand up and I said, "Andrew, I know I'm probably the last person that should do it, but if you want me to go, I'm willing." And he said, "Okay, you go." It wasn't because of my ability, it was because of my willingness. And so I led that community along with my wife for the next 9 months or so. And we saw incredible growth. We grew by 1 person. Again, not the greatest success story in the world, until eventually we handed back to that original couple and I was no longer leading a community for a while. Until sometime later, we had another leaders meeting. And Andrew said, "Hey, we've got a bunch of guys in Durbanville who are driving all the way to Tableview every week for Sunday meetings. They're coming through on Wednesdays. I want to plant a community in Durbanville. Is there anybody willing to go?" We were 1 congregation at the time. And again in the meeting, "Anybody willing to go?" I stuck my hand up and I said, "Andrew, I'm probably the last person in the room that should do it, but if you want me to do it, I'm willing." He said, okay, Mike, go do it. But this time he learned his lesson. He said, I'll send Steve and Kathy Corkill with you for support. And so we went and we started leading this community, about 20 people. And this time it really was incredibly successful. After 3 months, from 20, I'd grown it to 9. And that 9 was Chantal and myself, Steve and Kathy, the couple that were hosting, one other person, my daughter, down to 8. And at one point I went to Andrew, I said, Andrew, you need to find somebody else to lead this thing. I'm killing it. I've destroyed it. And his answer was this, and again, as community leaders, hear what great leadership is. He said, Mike, it's not you. God is pruning. Just keep going. God will do something. And then something remarkable happened. Over the next 6 months, that comm started to grow and grow and grow, to the point where it was about 40, 45 people. We split it in 2, and then I handed it over to somebody else who was an elder who lived in the area. And I'm not saying that to boast, because it couldn't have been me. It was God. But those 45 people formed the foundation of our first ever congregational plant. And our congregation in Durbanville now came out of that. Later, Andrew spoke to me and he said, we've got this congregation in Durbanville. We need somebody to go and lead it. Will you go? And again, I thought he was crazy. Me leading a congregation, you must be mad. But I'm willing if you ask me. And so he sent me to Durbanville, and we were meeting in the Durbanville Children's Home. And over the next couple of years of leading that, it grew from about 100 people to 200 people. Not because of who I am, but who God is. And I want to say this. God does incredible things, not through the most gifted people, but through the most willing. And I can honestly tell you, nobody knows me as well as I know me. I know my history. I know at school I wasn't just not the captain of any teams. I wasn't in any teams. I was a nobody. If I went back to my school reunion now, people wouldn't even know who I was. It wasn't that I was literally a nobody. And outside of Christ, I know that I'm a nobody. But in Christ, with what little bit I had to offer, I said, I'm willing. Like the boy with the bread and the fishes, he said, I'm willing. And the incredible thing in God is if you're willing to give him what little you have, he replaces it with more, and he increases and increases and increases. So I want to encourage you, if you're listening to this and you're considering being a community leader, you're being asked to be a community leader, or you already are a community leader and you're wondering, am I really qualified? Do I have anything to give? I want to say this. Just give your willingness. And if you are willing, God will use you. And if you're willing to be adjusted, if you're willing to change, if you're willing to be challenged, if you're willing to be corrected, then God will work through you. He will grow you. And you will have testimonies of how God has done the miraculous through you. I am who I am today. 1, because I'm willing. And 2, because leaders were willing to take a risk on me before I was the finished product.